This is TWiT.
So, Atlee, A-T-L-I, Atlee Davidson, he said, "Hi, Steve. Longtime listener and SpinRite owner. I'm giving away an external USB hard drive and want to securely erase the drive. A few years back, I stumbled upon the Format P option to specify how many times to overwrite the drive. There's a lot of mixed information on how many times to overwrite the drive. So I picked 7, as some articles suggested. What would be the sufficient times to overwrite the drive? Some say 3, some say 1. I used 3 times for my SSD a few days back, and now using 7 for a large spinning drive, which will probably take days. I probably should have at least swapped those numbers and used a larger value for the SSD? Any thoughts? Looking forward to the next few hundred Security Now episodes." Okay, so as I mentioned previously, since Atlee's problem is going to become increasingly common for many of us, GRC's planned second commercial product to follow SpinRite 7 will be an easy-to-use, fast, and extremely capable secure data erasure utility. Its sole purpose will be to safely and securely remove all data from any form of mass storage. It will understand every nuance, strategy, and variation available and will take care of every detail. But since that future utility is not yet available, here's what needs to be done in the meantime. And of course, even after it's available, you could still do this and be doing just as good a job, but it won't be, that advice won't be updated constantly and automatic, and it won't, you won't necessarily know all the features that each device offers. So that's where it makes sense, I think, to bring everything together into a single place. Okay, but the first thing to appreciate is that there are similarities and differences between the wiping needs for spinning versus solid-state storage. The differences are largely due to their differing physics for bit storage, and their similarities are largely due to the need for defect management and wear leveling. So let's look at solid-state storage first. The first thing to note is that electrostatic data storage, which is the physics underlying all current solid-state storage, has no notion of remnants or residual data, that is, in the individual bits. The individual bits of data are stored by injecting and removing electrons to and from individual storage cells. This process leaves no trace. Once those electrons have been drained off, nothing remains to indicate what that cell may have ever contained, if anything. Consequently, nothing whatsoever is gained from multiple writes to an SSD. The bigger problem with SSDs is wear leveling. As I've mentioned before, this process of electrostatically injecting and extracting electrons across an insulating barrier inherently fatigues that barrier over time. Earlier single-level cell, SLC storage, was rated to have an endurance of at least 100,000 write cycles. The move to multi-level cell, MLC storage, has reduced that by a factor of 10 to around 10,000. Okay, still, 10,000 writes to every bit is a lot of writing. So that's why, in general, solid-state storage is still regarded as being more reliable than mechanical storage. But the problem is that if only 5 gigabytes of a 128 gigabyte drive, solid-state drive, was written over and over, those remaining 123 gigabytes would remain brand new and unused, while the first 5 gigabytes that was being read over and over and over would be fatiguing due to the stress of being written over and over, which is a real thing for this form of solid-state storage. So the process known as wear leveling was quickly introduced, where leveling introduces a mapping layer which is interposed between the user on the outside world and the physical media. This is known as the FTL, for Flash Translation Layer. So now say that, just say for example, that the first 4 kbytes of memory is read from a flash memory. The user then makes some changes to that data and rewrites it back to the same place. What actually happens is that the rewrite occurs to some lesser used physical region of memory, and the FTL, that flash translation layer, is updated to point the logical address of that memory region to the physical location where the updated memory now actually resides. This beautifully spreads the fatiguing that's being caused by writes out across the entire physical surface of the memory to prevent the overuse of any highly written memory addresses. But there's a downside to this when it comes to data erasure. Remember that the 4 kbytes were originally read from the beginning of the drive at that location, but then they were rewritten to another location, and the FTL was updated so that the next read of that same 4 kbyte region will be from the most recently written location where the updated data was stored. But what happened to the original 4 kbyte region that was read first? When the FTL is updated to point its address to the new location, it becomes stranded. It is literally unaddressed physical memory. If the FTL does not have a mapping for it, it cannot be reached from the outside. It's still there. It still contains an obsoleted copy of the 4 kbyte region's previous data, but there's no way to access it any longer. And if there's no way to access it any longer, there's no way to deliberately overwrite it with all zeros or whatever to assure that its old data has been permanently eliminated. It's, you can't get to it. Now, okay, you might say, if there's no way to access it, then no one else can either. But that's probably not true. Solid-state memory controllers, which is where this FTL lives, contain undocumented manufacturing commands to allow external manipulation of the FTL. So while it's not easy to do, it's likely that there are powers higher up that could perform recovery of all obsoleted data, even after all of the user-accessible data had been wiped clean. And if the information was important enough, it's also possible to desolder the memory chips, which are separate from their controller, and access them directly, thus bypassing the FTL entirely. And there are videos on YouTube showing how this can be done. It is for all of these reasons that solid-state mass storage added special secure erase features to erase data that cannot be accessed through the normal I/O operations of reading and writing from the outside. When a secure erase command is sent to solid-state memory, all of the device's memory is wiped clean, whether or not it is currently accessible to its user. This command is carefully obeyed by today's manufacturers since there's no upside to being found not to be doing this correctly. So in short, the only thing that needs to be done for any solid-state drive which supports the secure erase feature is to arrange to trigger the command, then sit back and wait for the command to complete. Once that's done, the device will be free to discard, to be discarded or given away to somebody else. It will be empty.
So this is a big deal because for a long time we said you can't really effectively erase solid state because of this slack space problem. And so
Right.
that's good
And
to
you,
know.
You
That's
actually
good.
can.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's really good to know.
Although you need to know how to issue the command.
Right.
There are various levels of command. Some drives will allow you to securely erase only the unused area, so you get to keep the used area.
This is why we need Steve to write an app, by the way.
That's why I believe there will be a place for this.
Yeah.
And for what it's worth, I would still do one pass of overwriting just because, belt and suspenders.
Right.
Do one pass of overwriting, which does not fatigue the device very much when you consider it's got 10,000 available, and then tell it, now erase yourself. And that way, you know for sure. But what's interesting, Leo, is the story with hard drives is somewhat murkier due to their long history and some bad advice that has outgrown its usefulness. And that's coupled with some panic, that, aliens may have more advanced technology than the NSA, which would enable them to somehow unearth layers of previously written data from long ago. Okay.
Well, here comes my favorite line of the whole thing. Go ahead. Keep going.
So here's what I believe to be true for any hard drives manufactured since around the year 2000. The earliest hard drives used an extremely simple encoding of user data into magnetic flux reversals. It was a modified form of frequency modulation, so we, of course, call it MFM. Then, by dividing time into smaller quanta and using the precise timing of flux reversals to convey additional information, 50% more data could be stored using the same total number of flux reversals. We called that run-length limited coding, or RLL.
Oh, I remember those days, yeah.
And that was probably the last time that it might have even been theoretically possible to recover any data that had previously been overwritten. Everything since then has been hysteria.
I love your line in here. Go ahead, say it. It's a miracle that it's possible to read back even what was most recently written.
Yes.
That they work at all is a miracle.
That's right. When discussing solid-state memory previously, I was careful to mention that once the electrons had been removed from a storage cell, there was no remnant of the data which had previously been recorded. No footprint remains. That's not entirely true for magnetic storage, and that was the original source of the hysteria. To some degree, magnetism is additive because residual magnetism arises from the alignment of individual magnetic domains, and it's their vector sum that determines the resulting overall magnetic field vector. Thus, the greater the number of domains having the same alignment, the stronger the resulting field. So when a new magnetic field is imposed upon a ferrous substance which was previously magnetized, the resulting magnetic field will be a composite which is influenced by the field that was there previously. If the previous field was aligned with the newly imposed field, the result will be a somewhat stronger field. But if the previous field had the opposite alignment, although the new field will dominate, the result may be ever so slightly weaker as a result of the memory of the previous opposite field still being present. So, in theory, if we assume that a new magnetic field pattern was uniformly written, tiny variations occurring when that magnetic field is later read back might be due to the data that was previously present. In other words, something remains, however tiny. That is the source of the concern over the need to overwrite and overwrite and overwrite a hard drive, in order to adequately push it back, push what was there back into history, the original data, essentially burying it so that it is beyond any recovery. None of that has been necessary for the past 20 years. This was only theoretically possible when the encoding between the user's data and the drive's flux reversal patterns were trivial, as they were back in the early MFM and RLL days. They have not been trivial for the past 20 years. Today, and here's your line, Leo, it's truly, and I mean this, a miracle that it is possible to read back even what was most recently written. Well, it's just astonishing how dense these hard drives have become. And many drives have become utterly dependent upon their built-in error correction to accomplish even that. Today's magnetic flux reversal patterns, which are recorded onto the disk surface, bear only a distant relationship to the data that the user asked to be recorded. Where it was once true that bits of user data created flux reversal events on the drive, today large blocks of user data are massaged and manipulated. There's something called whitening is done to them. They're bleached.
It's kind of amazing these things work at all.
It is insane, Leo, how far this technology has gone.
It's because of the density of the bits, right? I mean, we're just storing.
It's because of the density and because it is so difficult to get any more of them in the same amount of space, yet they just, management keeps demanding it. So the engineers go, well, I guess we could run it through a pasta maker in order to,
Let's whiten it.
I don't know, shred it and then recombine it or something.
I got to say, there's a lot of credit to technology. I mean, you and I both, I'm sure back in 2000 thought there's no way we'll still be using spinning drives in 2023.
People have been predicting the demise of the spinning hard drive since the 90s. A decade.
Yeah.
Yes, and we're still here, baby.
They keep upping the density. I mean, you can get 20 terabyte drives now. It's insane. Unbelievable.
Okay, so these large blocks of user data are massaged and manipulated, and then the result is what's written back down. And then somehow this process is reversed. And after it's reversed, it's unmassaged and de-whitened, and the contrast is turned back up, and then error correction is used in order to give you back what you asked to have written in the first place. That's what's actually going on. So, given all of these facts, here's my own plan for GRC's secure disk spinning disk data erasure program, which will closely follow after SpinRite 7. Actually, I'm going to use pretty much all of SpinRite 7 in order to create the secure wiping utility. When GRC's program is asked to securely erase a spinning hard drive, it will use an extremely high-quality random data generator to fill the entire drive with noise, pure noise. Then it will go back to the beginning and do it again. And that's it. If its user wishes to follow that with a wipe to all ones or all zeros for cosmetic purposes, so the drive appears to be empty rather than full of noise, they may elect to do so. But that won't be needed for security. The theory is that it's always possible to read what was most recently written, right? I mean, that's what a drive does. So in this case, that'll be the noise that was written by the final second pass over the drive. Then also, by the sheerest, most distant theory of data recovery that really no longer has any support, it might theoretically be possible, and you may need to consult the aliens for this, to get something back from that first noise writing pass.
Yeah.
But all that anyone would then ever get back is noise, the noise that was first written. absolutely unpredictable noise with no rhyme nor reason. And that noise will have absolutely, completely obscured any data that was underneath it.
I've been saying this for years. You don't need these 18 writes and overwrites and all that stuff. That's long gone.
Given today's complexity of the mapping between the data the user writes and the pattern of flex reversals that result, there is no possibility of recovery of any original user data following 2 passes of writing pure noise on top of that data. And thanks to SpinRite's speed improvements, this 2-pass noise wipe will be able to be done at probably around 1/4 terabyte per hour. So, because this utility will be using all of SpinRite 7's technology. So it will be feasible to wipe multi-terabyte drives in a reasonable amount of time and absolutely know that the data is gone. Now, spinning hard drives do still also have the problem of inaccessible regions. When defects are detected after the drive is in the user's hands, those defective regions, which contain some user data at the time, are spared out, taken out of service, and are no longer accessible. Although the amount of user data is generally very small, if such spinning drives offer any form of secure erase feature, and many do now, GRC's utility will follow its 2 passes of noise writing with the drive's own secure erase command, which is designed to eradicate data even from those spared out sectors in order to get to all the final little bits. And one final note before I close this answer. There are also drives that have built-in AES encryption hardware that's always active. When the drive comes from the factory, it will have an initial default key already established. So it looks like just any regular drive. But this means that any user data that is ever written to such a drive will have first passed through the AES cipher using the drive's built-in key, and that everything that's ever written to the physical drive media will be encrypted on the drive, whether it's spinning or it's solid state. Both technologies now have this available. And that means that securely eradicating all recoverable traces of the user's data will be as simple as replacing and overriding that one key with a new randomly generated key. At that point, nothing that was ever previously written to the drive will ever be recoverable. And again, GRC's utility will know if the drive offers that feature and offer it. And you can, if you wanted to, belt and suspenders and, a parachute, you could, still do something that took longer, but there's really no point in doing that. So, to finish answering Alti's question, due to the physics of electrostatic storage, that is SSDs, there's no need to ever perform more than a single erasure pass over any current solid-state storage if you did not trust the drive's secure erase command. Then, if possible, follow that with a secure erase command if one's available. The drive's manufacturer will typically have a utility that knows how to do that with their own drives. And due to the physics of electromagnetic storage, it might theoretically be useful to perform a second overriding pass, and if possible, I would do that with random noise. That's what GRC will do. And again, follow that with a secure eraser command if one is available. And finally, if you're lucky enough to have a drive with built-in encryption, just instruct it to forever forget its old key and obtain another one, and the entire drive will then be scrambled with nonsense that nobody will ever be able to decode. So, now everyone knows everything I know about securely erasing data from today's mass storage devices.
So huge, because you've debunked, I've tried to tell people this for years, but you've debunked years of misinformation. People still run defrag, disk optimization on their SSDs, things like that. I mean, we carry old habits with us, I guess, is the problem. And thankfully, people listen to you, so good job. Tech Break is brought to you by ACI Learning. Keep your team's IT skills current. Visit go.acilearning.com/twit. Twit listeners will receive at least 20% off or as much as 65% off an IT Pro Enterprise Solution Plan. The discount's based on the size of your team when you fill out their form.